Welcome everybody to episode 1 of KDL for Dummies. I'm going to start with defensive types. I know everyone is kind of all over the place with where they're at when it comes to competitive Pokemon, so I decided it would be best to start from the beginning. There's a couple things that I should probably go over first. This is kind of the outline of what I have. So we're going to start with beginner stuff and then work our way into intermediate and then advanced. So if there's anything you want me to talk about, let me know and I'll add it to the curriculum at some point. But for beginner stuff, we're going to go over types, roles, items, mechanics, and then intermediate's going to be more like game theory of like free turns, investments, stuff like that. And then the advanced is going to be EVing, how to actually team build, and then draft league specific things you can do to get an edge in KDL. But if you see anything that's not on here, then let me know and I'll add it in at some point. The other thing is this is some real basic stuff that I hope you all knew up until this point, but if just in case, I'm going to go over it anyways. You look at close combat here, the physical symbol, that means it's a physical move, which means it's going to go off your Pokemon's attack stat and hit the defender's defense stat. And then for special attack moves like Shadow Ball, it's going to go off special attack and hit your opponent's special defense. So hopefully you knew all that. The other thing is stab, same type attack bonus. So as Annihilate is fighting in Ghost, you're going to get a 50% power boost to fighting in Ghost moves. So close combat's normally 120. It's going to be 180 if you're a fighting type like Annihilate. And same with Shadow Ball, it's normally 80, it's going to be 120. So if we use a coverage move like Earthquake, which is ground type, we are not ground type, so it's only going to be the base 100, it's not going to be 150. So I think a lot of you kind of figured that out on your own, but just in case no one knew, that's just some of the basic stuff I wanted to make sure you guys knew before we started. So time to start. Defensive types. Types can loosely be categorized as this, in my own opinion. It's not gospel, so there's a lot of good defensive dragon types, there's good defensive fire types, there's good offensive poisons, It's just kind of general trends with the types and how these Pokemon usually play out. And a lot of that has to do with unique mechanics just baked into the type themselves. So today, we're going to start with defensive types because the defensive types kind of dictate what's good offensively, particularly the one type that's bolded and underlined. Steel is just the cornerstone of defense in Pokemon, and everything about offensive types is directly related to Steel. So why is Steel so good defensively? It's because it has 10 resistances and 1 immunity. So normal grass, ice flying, psychic, bug rock, dragon, steel, fairy, it takes half damage from all of it. It's straight up immune to poison. It takes half damage from stealth rocks, the most common hazard, and is also completely immune to toxic. Toxic is the most important status you can get on a defensive Pokemon. It will wear them down, it will keep them low, they'll never be full health, and it's everything you want to hit onto a defensive Pokemon. So if we accept the fact that Steel is overpowered as fuck, the rest of this type chart starts to fill itself out. Fire, fighting, and ground are the 3 super effective types against Steel, so those are automatically 3 of the best offensive types. Not only that, any other type that can't hit Steel super effectively is going to be packing fire, fighting, or ground coverage for it. Electric and Ghost hit it neutrally and are pretty good offensively. Water and Dark also hit it neutrally, and those are the only 7. So the only 2 good offensive types that don't hit Steel at least neutrally, is Ice and Dragon. We'll talk about those later. We won't worry about it now. But Ice has a ton of other coverage that makes it worth it, and Dragon just has nukes for ability freeze and power on its moves. So they're still going to do fine without being able to hit Steel, but if you can hit Steel, you're automatically a good offensive type. It's just as simple as that. To actually dive into Steel more, it doesn't have too many unique mechanics. It's immune to Sandstorm, but it doesn't get the Sandstorm buff. That's only for rock types. Rock types will get a 50% buff to their special defense if they're in Sandstorm. Steel does not get that, thank God, but they don't take damage. And then, of course, they're immune to Toxic, so that's about the only unique mechanic any tank ever asked for anyways. As a general trend, they're usually high in defensive stats, and they're usually attack and defense based. So if we dive in to the steals, they're going to be more attack and defense based, kind of metal coated, and they're going to typically weaker special attack, special defense. Now this has changed throughout the years, especially with Gujar Hisui coming out with monsters special defense. But Aegislash, kind of as close as you're going to get Magirna. There's really not that many special defense steel mons or even less special attack mons. So there are more now with Iron Crown, Arch Ladon, Golden Go being added. So Game Freak is adding more special attack and special defense mons, but I don't think Steel really needs them. I think it's doing just fine without them. They're typically a little on the slow side, but that's kind of changed too as Game Freak tries to balance out the rest of the types. But they're thick. That's all you really need to know. Yeah, and because of Steel's properties, the tier list is just slammed with Steel types. So this many Ubers is Steel. This is probably going to be the most out of any type. And even OU is ridiculous. And you take in the fact there's maybe 40 mons in OU ever tops, and there's 9 of them are Steel. That's just downright absurd. And the UUs, Aegislash, Celesteela, Magnezone, these are really good mons too, and they're all the way down in UU. And that's what does kind of happen, because Steel is so common, people are going to be C-teaming for it all the time. Every mon is going to have some sort of way to hit Steel because it's so prevalent and so good. So these mons that, like Aegislash and Celesteela, could easily be OU if people weren't always planning for them, but they get caught in the crossfire quite a bit. A second thing to note is secondary typing is pretty important with Steel, because since everyone is always packing coverage to counter Steel moves, the secondary type is a big deal, especially defensively. If you look at the secondary type up here on the tier list, it's almost always taking away a weakness. So Corviknight's also flying type, which now that helps even out fighting, so it's not super effective anymore, and immune's ground. Ferrothorn, grass resists ground, so that's going to even out. Golden Go, immune to fighting because of Ghost. Heatran has Flash Fire, so it eats fire moves, it deals with fire. Iron Treads doesn't care because he's doing his own thing. Same with Kartana, but grass does even out the ground. King Gambit's doing his own thing. Melmetal doesn't give a fuck because he's an absolute stat stick. And Bug Steel is one of the best defensive combinations in the game because its only weakness is 4x to fire. So Bug will even out both fighting and ground, but add an extra fire resistance. Steel Fairy is also one of the best combos in the game because it evens out the fighting, so you're still weak to fire and ground. But as you'll see, secondary types with Steel completely change the way you have to approach them. Because if you're going to be a Psychic type and just run Mystical Fire, you're going to get stonewalled by Heatran. If you think you can get away with just Earth Power, you're going to get stonewalled by Ferrothorn or Caesar Mega or Corviknight. So the secondary typing hugely changes the way each of these walls work, and when you get to team building, it will change and kind of reroute which one you end up taking. It's okay offensively. There's no type that's just straight up bad offensively. It hits ice and rock, which is, fine. Fairy is the big one. Being able to hit fairy types is pretty good. But the biggest problem with steel offensively is the low power moves. So if we look at steel, the most common steel attacks are Iron Head, which is only 80 power, and Flash Cannon, which is also only 80. So to get past that, because that's not really good, you want more than that. Ferrothorn and some other people get Gyro Ball. Celesteela gets Heavy Slam, and those each go up to 120. So if you can do that, great. But as you'll find, is a lot of these good offensive steel mons, like Golden Go, they have their own unique moves. So they just Make It Rain, that takes them up to 120. That's great. Melmetal has Double Iron Bash, which is 120, plus Iron Fist, plus Stab, Nuclear Bomb. So the ones that do excel on offense are typically or like King Gambit, he's just spamming dark moves and then has steel to hit the fairy if they try to wall him with fairy. So Caesar Mega, Bullet Punch with Technician, extremely good. Other ones like Magirna, as you probably saw, I don't think I ever ran Flash Cannon on Magirna. I just took coverage instead, and you'll find that with a lot of the special attackers is they'll just forego Steel Stab and just take coverage, and their secondary type will be their main type, essentially. So offensively, not much going on. A lot of these are going to opt for other options than their Steel Stab. Heatran's going to Magma Storm. Corviknight's going to Brave Bird. Mawile's going to SD, Sucker Punch, do a bunch of other stuff. Aegislash is going to spam Shadow Balls. So offensively, there's really not much going on, but I mean, you don't have to worry about it that much because, I mean, you have the defensive properties, you have your other secondary typing, you're good. You can relax. You're gonna be all right. One of the other ways it does contribute offensively, though, is just through the defensive coding of steel. So if you look at someone like Caesar's not a fast sweeper. Like, you're not gonna don't do this. He typically, especially monotype, would do this, and then he'd run Swords Dance, and he's kind of like a bulky sweeper, a slow sweeper. And he's allowed to do this because he's so thick, because of his base stats and having steel. He's allowed to just sit there and basically sweep you while just eating attacks, and usually carries Roost if he needs to. And he'll just sit there, eat attacks after one Swords Dance, and just kind of slowly sweep you. There's a lot of mons that will do it, and steel and other defensive types you'll find is one of the big reasons why. Kind of Magirna, if you run like Trick Room Magirna, or you're not speed boosting. Some people run Magirna with just like defense and then stored power and Calm Mind, and they'll just slow sweep right in front of you, and they'll take hits, they'll get hit, they don't care, and they'll just run through 4, 5, even 6 mons, and you won't be able to kill them. So steel can definitely help out offensively, but it's almost always through defense that's actually helping you out. Poison is our next big boy. Steel and Poison are kind of like the big two, and Poison is really good because, like Steel, it is immune to Toxic. Unless you have Corrosion, you can't Toxic Steel or Poison. And on top of that, Toxic cannot miss. So if you have a Poison type, like our Clodsire here, and you use Toxic, which normally has 85% accuracy, it will have 100% accuracy for poison types. If they're using fly or dig or something, it'll miss. But for all intents and purposes, it goes up to 100% accuracy if you are a poison type using toxic. If you Terra into poison, I don't know, because I hate that mechanic. I don't think about it. I would imagine it would, but I don't know. I'll have to look that up. On top of this, you also consume toxic spikes. So if there's 1 layer, 2 layer toxic spikes on the ground, and you switch in, you're just going to eat the spikes, consume them. It's the best way to get rid of them. If you're playing in KDL against a team that doesn't have a poison type, you might want to look into running toxic spikes because you know they're not going to be able to remove them easily. And then Black Sludge is a unique item for poison types. And it is exactly leftovers, but it'll hurt you if you're not poison type. So why run Black Sludge? It's because of Trick. Trick is a move that swaps items. So if you're running Toxapex, Clodsire, some poison type, and you want to run leftovers, run Black Sludge instead. So that way if you get tricked, you're going to get their item, they're going to get the Black Sludge, and it's actually going to damage them for 1/8 a turn rather than heal them. So that's always one of those little details you always want to include when you're making your team. The general trend for poison is they tend to be either just the stonest of stone walls or the most frail, squishy, just get blown over by the wind Pokemon. Noggindel, Sneasler, just they get one tapped. And then you see Clodsire, Slowking, Galar, and Toxapex, just 3 of the most premium stone walls you've ever seen in your life standing in front of you. Same with the Moongus, Mega Venusaur's thick, Slowbro's thick. Mega Beedrill would die to a paper airplane if it got hit. Glamora, he's doing Glamora things. And Iron Moth does have good special defense, but weak defensively. And that's kind of the general trend for poison, is they tend to be a little more special attack, special defense coded. There's not as many physical ones. Sneasler's physical, Beedrill physical, Scolipede physical. Those are really it. I guess Peck kind of can be, but it has Malignant Chain and stuff, which actually now I'm thinking about it. No, it is just special. Okay, so Peck's going to be special even though theoretically it could, but it's not going to. So they're typically special attack coded and typically more on the special defense side. It has 5 resistances. Fighting is huge for resistance. Also Fairy, Poison, Bug, Grass. Those last 3 aren't as important, but Fairy and Fighting, really good resistances to have. Especially Fighting being one of the big 3 that hits Steel. Making sure you have a resistance for that is very nice. They are good at kind of being like damage tanks. So if you take like a Moongus, only has 85 special attack, and you're running him like this, Sludge Bomb is 90 power. So 90 power plus stab, like 145, whatever. That off of an 85 special attack, that's still going to do a good amount of damage. On top of the 30% chance to poison. That's another big thing with these poison attack moves. This Poison Jab is the same way, where it also has a 30% chance to poison on top of just doing damage. So a lot of good kind of like tank offensive hybrid options, because you want your tanks to be able to do damage in some way. And Steel kind of struggles with that unless they have Gyro Ball or Heavy Slam or something. Poison does not. Poison will nuke you with a Sludge Bomb or Poison Jab, Sludge Wave, on top of just being able to toxic you. Not to mention Amoonguss also, gets Giga Drain, other stuff. He's very good offensively, even though he is a defensive Pokemon. So on top of toxic scaring you, you don't want to get your tanks toxic. You also don't want your offensive mons getting nuked by a sludge bomb either. Because if they get hit for 50% plus the poison, it's kind of RIP. In terms of offensive potential with poison, it's usually possible if they have their secondary typing be something that is good against steel, since poison doesn't affect steel at all. That's why Sneasler is so good, because fighting will hit the steel. Nagandale does get flamethrowers, so don't worry about him. Beedrill does get drill run and knock off Iron Moth, fire type for steel, and Sculpey gets earthquake. So all the offensive poison mons are basically required to have steel coverage. I mean, that's kind of the trend for every single type that isn't one of these 7. But with poison, it is kind of extra important. But that's really it. They're thick. They have toxic that can't miss. And they can hit you hard with the old S-bomb. So, very nice. Very safe option for defense. Flying type pisses me off. I hate this type. I hate using it. I've always hated it. And it's so useless in so many occasions. And we'll get into it. First off, dog shit stab options. You guys have probably realized this if you have a flying type. But my god, is cock and ball torture to run flying moves. And in the monotype circle, at least back in Gen 7, flying type teams actually struggled to get flying type moves onto their team. Like, you could make a full flying team and not have a single instance of flying stab, because it is the most secondary typing you'll ever see. And the problem is either you're stuck using low power moves like Air Slash or Aerial Ace, or you're stuck using a high power move that just has some instance of bullshit. So Fly takes 2 turns. You don't really want to use it. Hurricane only has 70% accuracy. And then there's moves like Acrobatics that are good, but you have to get rid of your item first. We can try to find more instances. Yveltal has Oblivion Wing, only 80 power. Nothing really that special. Brave Bird is good, but you have recoil, so it's good for defensive mons like Corviknight as kind of like a hard-hitting move defensively, and he's got HP to spare. But if you're running an offensive Pokemon and you're trying to sweep, you don't want a Brave Bird because you don't want to take all that recoil damage. So they have added dual wing beat, which, oh boy, goes up to 80 power. Hitting twice is nice, but it's still only 80 power. It's like 80 power and under for clean moves. Anything over is full of bullshit, full of these stupid things you have to do to be able to use them. And it's just a really inconvenient type offensively. And there's times where I would be playing monotype and I load in and I would have to check to make sure I'm in monotype, because I would look at the mons and I would think I was in OU, because I wouldn't make the connection that they were all flying type when I was first starting out. So that's kind of a funny little side tangent, but it really does just go to show you how much of a secondary typing fighting or flying really is. It is, I mean, none of these mons are utilizing their flying type. Ho-Oh is gonna rip off Sacred Fires. Lando's running Earth Power and coverage moves. Lugia's doing tanky things. Rayquaza is outraging, V-creating, whatever. Salamence with Aerialate, finally someone that uses flying in a non-bullshit way. Unfortunately, it requires Aerialate in very specific circumstances. So there are some mons that can do it, like Pinsir Mega also gets Aerialate. But good God, is it inconvenient. Shaman's just gonna flinch hacks you with Serene Grace, and Yveltal's doing dark things. None of these mons use it. None of them do. They don't care. Tornadus, like, doesn't have a... Yeah, it uses Hurricane, but it's just 70% or bust. That's pretty much it. Zapdos will just Brave Bird and kill himself. Hawlucha can do some Unburden acrobatics stuff, but it's just always a game to play with flying types, and it's really one of the reasons why I hate them. But if you can negate it, they are very powerful. They're very high, powerful moves, so if there is one that can get past the bullshit, it's going to nuke, and it's going to actually do really good. As long as it has some other option to deal with Steel, you're going to be good. There are a lot of legendaries and mythicals you'll see. The whole Ubers section is all legendaries and stuff like usual. Legendary, legendary, legendary. There's a ton of them. Game Freak loves to make flying type legendaries and stuff. All of the Therian Gen 5 mons, they're all flying type, so there's a lot of good flying mons that you can work in, but, you know, you're going to have to use the flying type for the defense, not really for the offense. But defensively, it is pretty good. It's immune to ground, which is huge, and resist fighting. So right there, you're nailing two of the big three, essentially, of fighting and ground. And on top of that, you're resisting grass and bug, which, you know, cool, but no one really cares that much. So being able to pair a flying type with a steel type is huge. The other problem is they rely on boots. So they're going to take 25% from stealth rocks, assuming their secondary type isn't helping. So in almost all of them, you have to run boots, especially if you're trying to use it defensively. Offensively, you know, you can get away with it if you're trying to sweep or something. But defensively, you're kind of forced into boots unless you're someone like a Gliscor or something that's takes normal damage and has some better shit going on, or like Skarmory, Corviknight. If you can get it down to just neutral damage, you can probably run other stuff, but it really, really sucks trying to use these types if you don't have boots on and they have rocks up. Some of the things I missed, they are immune to spikes, which includes normal spikes and toxic spikes. Defog is not limited to just flying types, but it's most common on flying types, and also same with Roost. So that kind of also feeds into the defensive properties because they're really good defoggers and they have frequent access to recovery. So through all that, you're coming in, you're immuning ground, resisting fighting, clearing hazards, recovering. You're decently fast too. Like, there's not any slow flying types. All of these mons, even the defensive ones, Gliscor at 95, Lando T at 91, these two at 90 and 100, they're decently quick. So they can come in, even with defensive setups, clear stuff, heal, get out with U-turn. They'll have a lot of the time and get out. Also, with the speed comes the grounded mechanic. So if you use Roost, it removes your flying type for the rest of the turn. So if we have Zapdos, who has 100 speed, even built defensively, he's going to be at 236. That's still not bad. If he has Roost, you can kind of use it to get a little extra recovery before you leave in situations where you normally wouldn't. So if there's an ice type ice beaming him, but it's slower, you can Roost, eat the ice beam. It won't be super effective, so you can actually heal a little bit, and then U-turn out the next turn, where no other type can do that. No other type can just remove its type for the turn being. And being, you know, I hate flying, and it's a shitty type, and I hate it. It is kind of ironic that it's the one type you can actually remove from yourself. On the other hand, you can get hard red, and if you try to Roost in front of an Excadrill and he clicks Earthquake and he's slower than you, you're going to get slammed with an Earthquake because you're now weak to ground. where you're normally muting it. So there's kind of this flying type removal roost minigame that a lot of these mons can play. And of course, this only works if they're faster, because if they're slower, it only lasts to the end of the turn anyways. But there is kind of this fun aspect to them. And I believe if you roost and there's spikes out, you won't like land on them and get fucked. I don't believe so. But that might be something I have to test out. On to Fairy. Fairy has its wonderful mystery terrain, which prevents them from being statused, or just any grounded Pokemon from being statused. That's another thing grounded matters for, is terrain only works if you're grounded, by the way. So grounded Pokemon will take half damage from Dragon-type moves, and also not be able to be statused. Misty Terrain, for some reason, does not buff the power of Fairy-type moves. Electric Terrain will buff Electric, Grassy buffs Grass, and Psychic Terrain buffs Psychic. Misty Terrain does not buff Fairy for whatever reason. But what's important about Fairy-type is it's essentially a tier list killer. And for those who don't know, Fairy-type was added in like Gen 6, I believe. So it is the newest type into the game. Fairy was designed to be weak to types that are bad offensively, but resist types that are good offensively and be able to slam them back. So if you look at a type chart where comes a Fairy, it hits Fire half because, I don't know, Fire was bad defensively, so they wanted to have a little bit of an edge. It hits Fighting well because Fighting previously only had 2 weaknesses. It resists Poison because, I don't know, Game Freak. And then it's good against Dragon and Dark because those were 2 of the best types back in, the earlier gens that needed something to be able to deal with them. On top of that, it hits Steel only 50%, whatever, big whoop. That's not really a problem. The main thing with Fairy is that it is resistant and also super effective against Fighting, Dark, and immune to Dragon. And as we discussed, Fighting, Dark, Dragon, all really good offensively. So it's just kind of weird because Fairy doesn't exactly always make sense, but it's really good because by design it was created to counter the best types in the game and be weak to the worst types. Well, guess what? Since adding Fairy, those types that were the best are still some of the best types in the game, and the types that were the worst are still shitty. So Fairy, just by nature of being created, is really good against really good types, and then bad against types you really don't have to worry about. So it has decent moves. Moonblast is really the kicker. That's 95 power, 100 accuracy. Stab Moonblast hits pretty hard. Kind of in the Sludge Bomb boat, but you don't have the 30% poison chance. Play Rough is like mid, 90 power, 90 accuracy. Not like super great. So a lot of Fairy types using Fairy type Stab are going to be special attack coded. And on top of this, Fairy type, because it was backfilled, a lot of old normal types got turned into Fairy, and they're not very good, and they're kind of down here. But due to the release of the Tapus and all the new Fairy types, they wanted to make sure that there were good Fairy types in the game. So Fluttermane, VGC doubles, poster child, Magearna, Zacian, the Tapus, Iron Valiant, Hatterene, Diancie. Really, really good Pokemon that came kind of after the addition of Fairy. They came kind of like a gen or two later. And then the ones that were normal type, like Clefable that got turned into Fairy and Gardevoir, are still useful. But they're not quite as high as these other kind of new gen legendaries that got added to help Fairy out. On top of that, I said Fairy is a defensive type, but yet a lot of these mons are offensive coded, and that's kind of something interesting that they've done with Fairy type. None of these Pokemon are like truly defensive except for Clefable. Clefable is really the only like defensive wall. So Fairy type is kind of weird. Well, I guess Tapu Fini, I'm a liar. Tapu Fini, and you can use Magearna like that if you want to. But it's kind of interesting because while Fairy is very good defensive properties, there's not really a mon that can abuse it yet. And I'm not sure why. Maybe like Enamorus, like they kind of wanted it to, but its HP is low. Klefki kind of can, and Glimsnarl because of the screens and stuff. Primarina. Weezing Galar is a good one defensively. You kind of have to move down the tier list. And I think it's very interesting that they've done that. That we're still kind of waiting for the big premier Fairy Stonewall in ONU. They just haven't ripped it yet, and I'm not sure what they're waiting for. And looking at this, it kind of makes you think Fairy is good like an offensive type because all these mons are more offensive. But it is kind of one of those, you're probably going to be using the secondary type. Diancie Hatterene can, but like Iron Valiant, as long as you're comboed with a Steel Beater, you can still use it. Tapu Koko, not really using that much Fairy. Fini can Moonblast, Lele can Moonblast. The biggest problem with it is that Fairy gets resisted by Steel and Poison, and those are two of the most common defensive types. So as long as you're paired with a Steel Beater or a Poison Beater, you can use it. And it's still very good to just rip Moonblast off, but it is a very interesting type where you're gonna have to combo with something else, but it can be done. It can hit very hard in the right circumstances, and it's kind of like a cleanup type offensively, where after the Steel and the Poison tanks are kind of worn down, then you can really rip off Moonblasts. Because the only other thing resisting it is Fire. So once you get those main types out of the way, a lot of time the runway is just clear for Fairy type to just rip on through. So offensively janky, defensively janky, but that's the nature of Fairy. It was just a backfilled tier buster type. And Dalton famously has this quote, and he's not really wrong because of its kind of tier list hunting mentality and design, but it's very weird, very janky. And last but certainly not least, we have Grass, the Giga Chad of defensive types. And oh baby, is it something I love. I love me some Grass defensive types. Unique mechanics: it is immune to Spore and also gets Spore the most often. Non-grass types can get it, but you're going to see it on grass types 95% of the time. But grass types are immune to it, so if you use Spore and it hits a grass type, it's not going to work. And that's huge because Spore is, well, one of the best moves ever created in Pokemon. It has grassy terrain, which will weaken certain physical grass moves by 50%. I believe it's Earthquake, which is the big one, and then Magnitude and some other bullshit one that no one really cares about. It's mainly just Earthquake. Halves the effect of Earthquake and basically gives leftovers to all grounded Pokemon while up. They're also immune to Leech Seed, on top of being immune to Spore. And they also get Leech Seed the most often. Celesteela loves to steal the Thunder and be the main Leech Seeder, but, you know, fuck you, Celesteela, you broken piece of shit. This is a grass move. It's going to be on most grass Pokemon, and it is really, really damn good. So if you haven't made the connection, grass types have really good status and support utility. They're coming in, they're sporing, they're leech seeding, they're putting up grassy terrain, they're setting up, they're making a way, and not through damage, but they're making a way through support and utility to pave the way for the rest of your offensive mons. Now, they do have a lot of weaknesses. They're weak to fire, ice, poison, flying, and bug. It's 5 weaknesses coded into one type. Which begs the question, why the fuck is it a defensive type then? And if we go back to the tier list and kind of think it down and break it down, we know poison is not very good offensively. We know flying is not good offensively and full of bullshit. And we know bug is, well, bug. So all that leaves is fire and ice in terms of good types that grass is weak to. And mons like Mega Venusaur have thick fat, which means it takes 50% damage from fire and ice. So if you see, if we look up grass, basically all the defensive grass Pokemon are going to have some way of dealing with fire or ice and then just not really care about the rest. So Ferrothorn takes neutral to ice, Kartana neutral to ice, Ogerpon Wellspring counters both. Grass water phenomenal typing. That all that leaves is the other 3 that you're weak to, that we don't really have to give a fuck about. Amoonguss and Venusaur, they are weak to fire and ice. Well, Venusaur's not because of thick bat, but Amoonguss is, but that poison type takes away the rest of it. And then Hydrapple, Dragon takes away fire, but you're extra weak to ice. So there's not a lot of grass type mons that are up on this tier list. Only 3 in Ubers, 3 in OU. And there's not too many defensive Pokemon that are up here. But if the defensive Pokemon has the properties to deal with the 5 weaknesses, they're going to be really good. Ferrothorn, really good. Hazards, Leech Seed, Power Whip. Mega Venusaur, kind of his little brother, comes in, can bait out steel types and then earthquake them or HP fire them. Amoonguss gets Spore, Leech Seed, Toxic, Rage Powder, and doubles. It's phenomenal. So through kind of, if they're typing, their secondary typing and ability allow them to not get cleaned off the board and hang with the big boys, they can put huge amounts of work in through status and support utility. On top of this, offensively, and some of the defensive mons can use it, they have really good stab options. Wood Power and Wood Hammer and Power Whip physically, and then Leaf Storm specially. Leaf Storm's good for the defensive mons because they can go in below the load and leave. They don't have to worry about the stat drop. If you're trying to sweep with it, you got Energy Ball. Wood Hammer has recoil, but on something like Rillaboom, where you're having grassy terrain regen, all of a sudden that becomes more of an option. Superior has Contrary, where you're gaining special attack instead of losing it. Hydrapple's got some unique stuff going on. Ogerpon has Horn Leech and Power Whip, 2 phenomenal moves. Meowscarada has Flower Trick. Kartana just nuclear bomb with Leaf Blade and stuff. Surprisingly good Seed Flare on Shaman. Surprisingly good unique moves for a lot of these mons up here on the tier list, because that's kind of what it takes for a grass mon to be good. On top of this, you do have some really good resistances with electric, ground, and water. So ground is huge, electric is big, and water is also huge. We haven't talked much about water, but water, it's here and here. Like, it's really fucking good on both ends. And we'll talk about water later, but resisting water is absolutely massive, especially considering none of these other types do. It's just grass. as the answer to water. The only real answer to water is water and grass. And we'll touch on that next week, but that's absolutely massive. So overall, grass isn't actually a good type, but because of the way the meta's formed, circulating around certain types being good and bad offensively, it kind of finds itself in a niche where you're not going to see it all the time. It's not going to be on every team. But if there is a grass type there and it's built, the whole team is built for it, they really hit, they really smack. They can really put in some work and get some good utility out and really pave the way. I've used Rillaboom and KDL 1, Amoonguss and KDL 2. Having that grass type offensively too to hit water types and be able to counter water tanks, also very underrated. And grass isn't a type that you're going to see a lot of people plug in as coverage. A lot of these other types don't get access to grass moves. A lot of this stuff is kind of gate-kept around grass types themselves, which kind of buffs their value a little bit. You'll see some people work in like an energy ball, but I mean, they've already got coverage out the ass if they can afford to, sacrifice one of the 4 slots for an E-ball. They're sitting pretty, they're fine. But it can be seen, but just overall, grass, very kind of unique type that you're not really going to see anywhere else on any of these. But that concludes week 1 for our defensive types. Hopefully this sounds good. I changed my whole audio setup, got a mic arm, a pop filter, whatever. I've been changing some audio settings, so hopefully it's not popping and breaking too much. But this video, I don't even know. It might be like an hour long or something. I don't even know. But if you have anything else you want to talk about, let me know. Or if you think I missed anything, I'll touch up on it next week. But until then, that is it. We'll be going over the good at both next week. And we got some slappers to talk about. Most notably this motherfucker, which I've been trying to not talk about, but unfortunately, it is time that we have to talk about him. So we'll get there next week. Adios! Get a boost to, well, they don't get boost. Motherfucker.